here. This sits at about 2100 degrees. We have a large ceramic crucible in there, so that's basically just a big ceramic bowl. And that bowl holds about 500 to 600 pounds of molten glass that we throw in cold, bring up to working temp, and then we can start working with it. Next to that, we have our pipe warmer. Hot glass only sticks to hot things, so we got to preheat all of our pipes. Colin's got a nice little cherry red glow on his bulk pipe. We know that's a blow pipe just because it's got that hollow tip and that nice little mouthpiece on the end. So Colin can blow into that and actually inflate our glass. Then Colin's going to go over to our reheating chamber. You'll notice once he starts pulling material out of the furnace, it's going to cool down pretty quickly. So we got to go back into our reheating chamber that sits at that same 2150, and we can bring it all the way back up to working temp. So Colin's done a little bit of preheating. There's a couple more pieces of equipment. We'll talk about them as we start to get working. Colin's going to make something called a collar. And this is just a little skin of glass around the pipe. When we're working here, we're working at an open access studio. So theoretically, you could just get the pipe really hot, stick some glass onto it, and then start working with it. That totally would work. But so many different people use this studio that we want to keep a nice layer of clear on the outside. That way we don't have to worry about color cross-contamination. So Colin's giving that a shape. Colin's sitting at what's called our bench right now. You'll notice this is pretty heavy on your body, so for us to sort of stand and turn the pipe is going to be way too much work. So Colin has that nice little seat and those little rails that he can turn on. Colin's using his jacks, which are sort of our iconic glass blower tool. These are modeled after a pair of shears. So Colin's going to use these in a lot of different ways. That little table next to his bench is called his tool deck. And that's all of the space we get for all of our tools. So we have to be really conscious and make sure that they all do a lot of different things. Colin's prepped up a Soffietta for us today, which is a tiny cup. I have one I'll show you guys once we pick this up. But we can take glass and we can let it cool all the way down to room temperature. Colin's got some nice cane on his, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Giving it a little feathering of heat. This is what our Soffietta looks like. So you see it's this nice little hollow cup. So we can basically let the glass cool down to room temperature, and as long as we bring it up to that 900 degrees that kiln is, we can start working with it again. So Colin's put some cane on there. I'll show you guys what cane looks like. We can take larger globs of glass and pull it into these thin, tiny strands. So this is cane. This is sort of a traditional Italian technique of patterning. So we can pull these nice little strips out and then roll them up onto our bubble. So quite a bit of prep work for it. So as our color work gets more and more intricate, it honestly just takes more and more time. But Colin's got that Soffietta nice and warmed up. You'll notice it's hollow through the end. So if Colin starts to blow, it's actually just going to shoot out that little hole in the bottom. Now you guys can sort of see the canes a little bit. What color cane is that, Colin?
This is New Carmine, which is a beautiful red.
New Carmine. Fancy red.
Old Carmine red.
I know, I have one piece of old Carmine that somebody gave me that I've been hoarding.
It's like the truest red you could ever have.
Yeah, I've had it for like 5 years. Glass color doesn't really work like paint color, so we can't really make our own glass color in this facility. We can't take red glass and blue glass and melt them together and make purple. There's a couple different companies across the world. I think there's really 3 big ones that melt all of our glass color in here. And they do that by sort of adding different metal oxides into their tanks. So our tank is entirely colorless. We're a public access studio, so a lot of different people use this facility to make their own work. But if we were a private studio, a lot of places will have something called a color pot, where they'll actually melt their own color. Colin's got that nice and smoothed in. A little bit. I think he's going to have to do a little more marvering. Colin's got a very nice color called New Carmine, which is a very special red. And red's a really tough color because all of the different metal oxides that you need to go in there. Red has a lot of things like gold and the expensive stuff, so red's always really expensive. Red can also be a tricky color because it'll often turn brown. just because of the chemical reaction that's happening in there. So we use a mix between natural gas and forced air, which basically means that we have a lot of different types of flames happening. So Colin can bring in more gas and that'll cause a reducing flame, or he can bring in more oxygen and that'll cause an oxidizing flame, or in our case, forced air. And that can cause funky things to happen with the colors just because of those metals. Colin's got his nice little bubble. Normally you see us sort of blow into the end, cap our little pipe. We got a nice little bubble. But the nice thing about the Supio is that it sets your bubble wall thickness up for you. I'll kick that out of the way so that Caitlin doesn't run over it. So Colin's got his bubble nice and sealed up. He's gonna melt in that scar mark and make sure everything's nice and condensed. If he lets his bubble get too thin and he goes to try to gather over it, it's gonna totally collapse. So we gotta let this set up nicely. Yeah, that's smooth. Colin's got a little twist going on. Okay. The cool thing about canes is that you can really see how we're moving the glass. So Colin might twist it with his jacks, or he might twist it on our marver. We'll see what he does, but you'll notice he's only going to turn in one direction. If he turns back and forth, they'll actually straighten out. But since he's just turning in that one direction, he'll have a lot more control over how that twist twists out. Colin's got his diamond shears, which are a nice glass blowing tool. They actually cut from both ends. So you see Colin's got a big pair of scissors. Those are our straight shears. The thing about glass blowing is that we're working from all directions, right? Colin's turning the entire time. We got to think about this from all sides. So if we just cut with straight shears, it just leaves sharp lines. And Colin wants to cut in a round shape. So Colin's got that nice twist in. We'll condense it back down a little bit, I'm guessing. You don't really want to go into the furnace with something too long, because then it gets really hot. And the longer something is, the harder it can be to turn when it's really, really hot. You'll notice Colin's not wearing any gloves, and neither am I, and that's just so that he can have really nice dexterity on the pipe. He's going to cut off that extra little bit. And the nice thing about glass is that it's infinitely stretchable, right? It's got so much elasticity to it. Some colors, if we pull and pull and pull, it'll stretch out too thin and wash out, but I'm guessing this carmine's probably okay. So we can stretch these canes into teeny tiny thin. Oh, I remember these Supios. That's what the little cup in the office is, right? Yeah. Okay, Colin's gonna shape that up. They have to work in layers, right? Because Colin could make a giant Supio and have that be enough glass, but it's gonna take them a long time to heat up. So Colin's basically just prepping his color work, heats that up, and then we're gonna have to take a couple of dips on top of this to get enough glass to make Colin's picture. We'll let it set up a minute. We don't want to go back in there too hot, just because this can really easily fall off in the furnace. And then all of the metal oxides that make that color sort of leak into there. And then everybody's making red glass for like 3 to 5 years. And nobody wants that. Not even real red though, it'll be like a weird wash of red. It's not enough red to like make it really nice. Colin's taking his next dip, and then you'll really see what that hot glass out of the furnace looks like. We got that nice heat light. I know the glass looks orange and people are often like, oh, I don't really believe that that's clear, but I assure you anything that's sitting at 2100 degrees is going to glow bright orange. It's quite warm. You'll notice Colin has that nice little sleeve on. That's made out of Kevlar, which is sort of the same thing that firefighters and Batman use. Protects our forearm a little bit. You really don't notice how delicate your inner forearm skin is until you get into this. Because normally it like sits towards your body, right? No. That's a good amount of glass. Colin maybe has enough glass to make like a nice small vase or like a large cup. But we'll let that set up and take another dip on top. Ooh, Colin's giving it another twist. Making sure we're nice and twisty. Dipping his hand in some water. It can get quite warm on your hand, I have to say. So you sort of have to adjust to it.
We do have a question.
Oh yeah.
How hot is the glass right now that's in his hand?
How hot is the glass right now? So this is a tough situation, right? Because glass sort of has a couple of key temperatures. So when we're coming right out of the furnace, we're at 2100. That's really, really gooey. It still has some movement in it, but it's not quite as flowing. The furnace is the hottest the glass will ever be. If I have to take a guess, I'm guessing we're somewhere in the 1900 range, 1800, maybe 1750. Glass really starts flowing at about 1400 degrees. So if we were to sort of make a fusing or a casting or anything, that's sort of the temperature you want to go up to. But in our case, we never want to really dip down below 1000. That's where things can start cracking and breaking. When we're working in here, it's not always like rocket science, right? We all went to art school. It's always a little bit of guessing. A bubble. Oh no. You gonna pick it?
I can't.
Blah, blah. That's okay. I can rake before the next one.
I think there's railing in the section.
Oh, from the canes?
Yeah.
I have another question in here.
Oh yeah.
Someone, remember you said carmine, carmine red. Are there any other types of minerals or anything they use to color glass?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of different types. And a lot of those recipes sort of come from ancient factories, right? Not ancient, but like a lot of the American glassblowing history is from factory work. And those factories wanted to keep their recipes really, really secret. So they would have these things called recipe books, and you can do a lot of stuff. The most popular colors I feel are like the blues, so cobalt, copper. You throw a little bit of copper into the tank, it makes it all this really nice blue, sort of like Colin's shirt. Iron makes green, manganese makes purple. The pinks and the reds get a little bit more expensive. That's more of the gold and the platinum. But there's a lot of different metals you can use. Carmine red has carmine in it, or I think it's sort of made to mimic the paint color carmine red. A lot of the the color names you sort of get from painting.
You can see the color.
Yeah, we got some nice red. I don't know if it's still hot. Yeah, I can grab this. So this is the carmine. Can you see? There we go. It sort of mimics that paint bright color red. Like I said, it's also very hard to get red in here. And there's two different types of glass color as well. There's opaque color and transparent color. And transparent glass is anything that you can see through. So all of the windows in your house and your windshield and stuff is made out of transparent glass. Opaque glass is glass that light can't travel through it, right? So Colin's working with an opaque cane. And that's sort of nice because you can really see those really deep lines all throughout the colorless glass. So now Colin's got enough glass. He's gonna go in with our newspaper tool. I haven't talked about this yet, but it's actually really nice. So the hardest thing about working with this material is that you can never really touch it, right? Colin can't take his hands, feel the side of the bubble and how it's working. So all of our tools are made out of either stainless steel or wood or newspaper. And this really allows him to sort of get a feel on the bubble. If there's any ever weird divots or anything, you can feel it through that newspaper. And all of our tools that are wood or newspaper are waterlogged. So it never actually makes contact with the wood or the newspaper because that's going to burn pretty quickly. We use that water to create a steam barrier. And this is that same effect where if you have a hot pan on the stove and you like throw some water in it, it dances around. It's called our Leidenfrost effect, so we can use that to our advantage. Over time, you keep using your paper, it gets thinner and thinner, and eventually it'll start to feel warm in Colin's hands. But I feel like that one's pretty fresh. I bet he feels all right.
Feels pretty good.
I like a nice thick paper.
Have another question.
Oh yeah,
What is Colin making today?
Colin's making a pitcher today. So I think I briefly mentioned it. Pitchers are, when we're making stuff in here, we sort of have to think about functionality, right? There's a lot of different applications for glass. Like all of us who are on staff here are all artists working with glass in different ways. But on our demonstrations, we really have to sort of get it done within the time limit. So a lot of the time we'll function on functional work. So a pitcher has a couple of challenges. Colin has to add on a handle and he has to add on a spout. And when you first start making spouts, you sort of do it and none of them pour liquid. But I know Colin's made a lot of spouts.
I'm going to use a big marver.
Okay, Colin's gonna go over to our big marver.
Can you preheat my bag?
Of course. Colin's going on over to our big marver. And our marver comes from the sort of Latin root word for marble. So it's basically just a big slab of something. Ours is stainless steel. The modern era has its benefits. But what Colin's doing right now is he's really bottom weighting his glass. So we like to say that glass is a memory. Every time Colin touches it with a tool or does anything to it or rolls it on the marver, it's going to remember that later on. And the tip of that bubble is the first thing in the reheating chamber and the last thing out. So Colin wants to let this set up a little bit all the way at the end because that's eventually going to be the bottom of our vessel. And you know, we really have to be conscious about the work that we're making because glass is such a fragile material. And if it's something that's designed to be used, you want it to be a little bit thicker. I know it's much easier to break like a wine glass that's delicate that you have in your house than like a big old bowl. Now Colin's got his nice bottom weight in. You can see a little bit of that thickness in the bottom. And the nice thing about using Supios is that we're really taking advantage of the optical effect of clear glass, right? It doesn't look like there's two layers of clear on top of one layer of cane. It looks like it's cane all the way through. Colin's putting in our jack line, or our constriction line. This is really the main name of the game for the jacks. So everything that we make in here has to have a constriction line off of the end of the pipe. You'll notice nothing in the collection has a pipe stuck to the end of it. So we got to be able to get it off. And this is just sort of the most narrow point within our bubble. And that's how we're telling the glass where we know we want it to break off. Now Colin's got that constriction line in there. When we're working in here, we're really working from the top down. So this is going to be at the top of our vessel that's closest to the jack line, and then the bottom sort of the tip of the bubble. So Colin doesn't really want to get that jack line really hot anymore. If he ever gets it too warm, it's going to cause a lot more turning, and it's going to start flopping around everywhere. So in order to make this easier on Colin's body, he's just going to heat up the very tip of it because that's the part of the bubble he's looking to shape. Going in for a quick flash. Whenever you see Colin sort of enter the entirety of the reheating chamber, he's just taking something called a flash or a maintenance heat. So I'll talk about flashing later on too. But if we ever let anything within this bubble ever get too cold, below that 1,000-degree range, that's when things will start cracking. And that part that he has still attached to his pipe is called our moil. That's all waste glass, so it'll all come off of that pipe later on. But that sort of gives us an indicator of how the rest of the bubble is doing. When you're working in here, it's often sort of a time-intensive and expensive process. So you want to have a little bit of insurance to know how you're doing. I think that's about good for Colin. I might be wrong. The tough thing about red is that it does take a long time to heat up, so it's one of our stiffer colors. And colors can be stiff or soft. Soft colors heat up really fast, but then they lose heat really fast. But stiffer colors take a long time to heat up, and then they'll retain that heat. And Colin often has a very short working time, right? He comes out of the reheating chamber, he's got somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds to work on the piece, and then he's got to get back into the reheating chamber. So it's a lot of up and down for us. It's never a light day on your feet.
What are some examples of soft colors in art?
So our softer colors are like our blues and our greens. Just because of the metals that are in there, they heat up really fast. Like copper is a metal that heats up super, super fast. And that just sort of makes things a little more complicated. So when you first start blowing glass, you really work with clear, and you learn how to use the clear glass, you learn how the bubble moves, you do all of that kind of thing. Our stiffer colors are like our red, our orange, and our yellow. Orange is so stiff. And then our black is actually our most softest color. It's sort of like when you wear a t-shirt outside. Black is the softest just because it's a really deep blue or a really deep purple. And then our white is actually one of our stiffer colors. Colin works with this special type of white called Duro, which is like Italian-ish for durable, sort of in there, you know what I mean? And that's just a very stiff white that retains very crisp lines, so it never really gets too hot that it gets muddy or anything. So Colin's going in with his paper, he's working on the bottom of his bubble. He wants his picture to be nice and functional, so it sort of has that nice top section and then our lovely bottom section with a little bit of a waist. But I think pretty soon we can start working on the bottom, if I have to take a guess. So I have this nice wooden paddle. All of our wooden tools, I can show you guys this. All of our wooden tools are made out of a fruit wood. And Colin used our block earlier. But fruit wood has a really tight grain pattern, so there's not a lot of sap in there. If we use something like oak or pine, it's just gonna go right up in flames. So this has that nice tight grain pattern. Our blocks are waterlogged, these are not. They can catch on fire sometimes, but fire is sort of part of the deal. You ready? You said one more shake.
I lied.
So I'm going to come on with this wooden paddle, use it sort of like a mold so that we can physically shape the bottom of our vessel. We got a little bit of smoke. That's probably from my paddle. Yeah. So then Colin has that nice bottom. Really focusing on how we're shaping our bottom is really important because we want our glass to make really nice contact with the table. You want to do it again? Okay. If you ever like flip over a wine bottle or a soda bottle, it has that really deep indentation, so it makes nice ring contact around the sides. That's sort of what we're going for in here. We want nice table contact. So we're actually going to flip this around now. I'm going to make Colin something called a punty, which is the Italian word for point or bridge. And we're going to connect a little bit of glass onto the bottom, and then break this off with a blowpipe, and then start opening it up. So this is the part where I get really quiet because I have to focus. If I bring Colin an unshaped punty, it can cause this to really easily fall off onto the ground. So I'm going to cool this pipe down just so I can grab nice and high. We sort of think of our pipes like hockey sticks. You want to have a nice width. I went a little bit over, I'm sorry.
We'll work on it.
Oh. I always gather a little too much and then it squeezes over. So I'm gonna give this a little bit of heat. And Colin can go ahead and stick me on the bottom. And you'll notice he's turning just so that we can make sure that this is nice and on center. I should have given you a little more point. I'm sorry.
Red glass blowers can work with anything. Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Colin's gonna use a couple drops of water right onto our jack line. And then he gives it a tap and it comes right off. So I'm gonna give this a good flash or a good maintenance heat, just because that top was just cold enough to break off. I'll bring it back to Colin, and he's gonna center it up. When you take like a pottery class in the beginning, you know, you center the clay with your hands or whatever. But when we're working in here, we have to make sure we're staying on center the entire time. So this is the tough part. So if Colin sticks his putty off on super off center and then goes to open his cup, it'll actually open up sort of like a Z shape. It'll be super crooked. But now we can take our longest heat. So this glass was just cold enough for us to physically break it like room temperature glass. So Colin's got to get it all the way back up to working temperature. And you'll notice normally it's up and down and up and down and up and down. So this is our longest heat. And we have these nice doors. You see Colin's got a door open. That's when things start to get really hot. So if we were to make much larger of a piece, where we have to start opening those back doors, that's when you really want to have a third person with you. Really just to open and close the doors. But also sort of turning the pipe, blowing for you. Usually it's a very team-oriented sport. You can't really do a lot by yourself. Unless you're Colin, who practices blowing glass by himself a lot.
I'm trying to squeeze in that waist a little higher up
Okay.
so it doesn't just like,
Yeah, I see what you mean.
and then we'll trim the top.
Okay.
Squeeze the bottom of the top.
You don't want to trim with your shears?
I do, but I don't.
So Colin's gonna go back in with our newspaper, give this a little bit more shaping. Now that we're actually off of the pipe, it's a lot harder to shape our bubble. Colin has a couple little tricks he can use, but in this case, he's just gonna bring that waist up a little bit. This is where it gets complicated because we have to not only think about how stuff is going to pour out of this vessel, but we also have to think about how people are going to clean it. Colin's gonna go in with his tweezers. And these are just like your regular household tweezers, just big and stainless steel. And he's gonna physically pull and thin out the top of that. Because that's technically our shoulder, and that's the part that's closest to the pipe. Around, pull it out a little bit, and use that elastic property of the material in order to really thin out the top. Colin's giving himself a little dip. I'll give you a little shield, bud. And Colin's going in and he's physically pinching and pulling very gently. At this point, when the glass is really thin, we can get it really, really hot, but it'll actually cool down pretty quickly. So Colin really has a limited amount of working time to physically pull this out. I'm guessing he's gonna do it again, maybe? I was wrong. So Colin's gonna go in with his jacks. And he's gonna make that same constriction line we made before, but this time we're sort of using it for an opposite purpose. The glass always wants to break where the constriction is the narrowest. So we can use that sort of that principle of the glass making to really break this off nice and cleanly. I know Colin doesn't want that big squeezed out floret at the top. You could leave it. It could be an artistic choice. But when we're making things that are designed to be functional and clean, having that rippled top is going to be a lot harder to clean out and sort of drink out of on your mouth. Poor craftsmanship. I don't know. There's like artistic exploration applications you could do with the florets. But in traditional glass blowing, it's generally frowned upon. Colin's giving it a squeeze with his diamond shears, making sure we're nice and cold. I'll give it a little tap. Comes right off. Now we have a nice little bowl. Colin's going to start to open this up with his jacks, and he's going to use them in a little bit of a different orientation than before. The nice thing about, in theory, you can do everything with your jacks, right? You can make an entire cup with just your jacks. You can do giant vases with just your jacks, but that makes things a lot harder. So we have those extra tools, but your jacks are really the baseline tool you want to use for most applications. Oh, we're going to do a Sophie? You want a paddle really quick? Yeah. Okay. Colin's going to go in with his jacks. I'm going to give him a little paddle. And then he's going to use a tool called the Soffietta. So remember when I talked about how Colin has a nice little bag of trips for once we're off the blowpipe? This is the big one. And these were invented so that people could make those really, really thin goblets. Not for fanciness, but really just to save on shipping. And this allows Colin to re-inflate that bubble once it's off of the blowpipe. And when Colin's blowing, most of the time it's pretty gently. The glass is sort of like a balloon. When it's really, really hot, if you blow really hard, it's going to totally pop like a bubble. But now that it's pretty settled and we're not really on the blowpipe anymore, Colin's blowing pretty hard into that Soffietta. Okay. That sounds good. Colin's heating up that front end. Whenever you hear that little tink, that's just a pipe in the bucket. When the glass comes off of the pipes, it's just because it's cooling down. We don't have to do anything to get it off. It's just that temperature shock. So Colin's going in with his jacks. I got my paddle on to keep everything nice and flat. More than you think it does. This is a nice large cup. Yeah, it's like a Pilsner cup. You can drink a very large glass of water. That's the only liquid we need. Yeah. Colin's gonna probably do that one more time if I have to take a guess. Going on the outside. The nice thing about the bubble is that we can sort of shape it from both angles. So we've got the interior bubble and the exterior bubble. Yeah, once you put a spout in it, it'll be fine. Do you want the handle first? Yeah. Are you ready or you want to touch it again? Let's do a handle. Okay, so I'm going to make Colin a handle. I'm just going to get a quick double dip of glass. It'll give you a good view of our pitcher where it's at now. So here's where we're working pre-handle. And handles are a tough thing because we're going to bring a really hot piece of molten glass and stick it on. And molten glass wants to really move and flow, so Colin's got to be sort of careful before he sticks this handle back on. Do you just want to double dip, Colin? Okay. Yep. Colin, Colin's using our fluffy torch to keep that punty nice and warm. Our punty connection is a connection. We're going to use a little bit of heat shock to break this off of the pipe. But if it ever gets too cold, Colin's piece is going to fall right to the floor and break into a million pieces. Which is heartbreaking at best. Okay. So I got my nice double dip. I'm gonna marver some of that off. You want it like a pointy at the tip? Yeah. Is that narrow enough for you?
Yeah, get a little bit more meat on.
Okay. Like that?
That's gorgeous.
You want a flash? I'm gonna cool my pipe down. Not too hot, but moving. Oh yeah, never happened. Like that? So I'm gonna come on over, come straight up and down. And the nice thing about hot glass is that it sticks to itself really, really well. So Colin's gonna give it a little crimp, make sure he can get me off the pipe. And then he can cut me right off. And that forms enough of a seal that we don't really have to worry about that piece of the handle popping off. What Colin's doing now is sticking it, flipping it around, and sticking it back onto the pipe. This has to be sort of a quick move since you have that flange of the handle. It can really easily sort of fall off and stick back onto the bottle. And then instead of a handle, you have a nice decorative bit. But you'll notice Colin cut that piece off, flipped it around. That's because that edge can often be sharp. So I'm hoping Colin torches that. Because sometimes people forget. I know, then I have to go back in and grind it down. And a really nice big cup. Yeah, I can talk about cold working. So if Colin doesn't go in and torch that little cut, what I'll have to do later on, and usually it's me, is grind that down and so that it's nice and smooth. So glass sort of has a hardness of about 4 on the hardness scale, whereas diamond is 10 and like gypsum is 2. So we can use diamond tools to physically grind the glass down. My specialization is with Cameo Engraving, so I actually use 2 different colors of glass, and you can grind away different values within the glass. And we have some good examples of that in the collection. The most famous of which is obviously the Portland vase, so we have a copy of that here. We have some really nice Webb & Sons cameos. We have also some very nice ancient cameos, which can be really hard to find. Colin's going in with his map gas, and he's just heating the area he wants to move for his spout. He's gonna go in with his shears and use that round part. Remember, every tool's got a purpose. And even the handle of the shears you gotta use for spouts. You can put all kinds of things in that. Iced tea, lemonade, water, juice, all the fun beverages. So there's a nice cane picture. You can really start to see the lines. And I know that red sort of looks brown right now, but especially with carmine, you gotta leave it in the annealer for a minute. And then it'll start to show up as its true color.
You know if it's a hand tapper?
I don't think it's a hand tapper. It's not my best punny. I'll be honest. With you and everyone on the internet. So what Colin's doing right now is called flashing down. If we just leave this picture out in the room temperature air, the air is actually too cold and it's gonna physically crack and break into like a billion pieces. So we're actually gonna load it away into our annealing oven, which is sort of just a specialized form of cooling. So that way we can anneal it overnight. So what Colin's looking for now is a little bit of movement in that punty. We don't want the piece to actually move, because the tip was just hot enough for him to put that little spout in. So you know it's pretty warm. But we gotta introduce some heat into that punty. I'm gonna put on my super cool outfit. One more? Okay. Two more. Okay. Yeah, hit me with it. So I have these cool Kevlar mitts on. I don't know if you can see them. These allow me to physically grab the glass. So these sit in my locker at room temperature. If I grab the glass with just these mitts, they can be cold enough to actually crack it. So I give them a little bit of preheat. That way the temperature shock doesn't shoot a crack right up the side. Okay. I can do that. I don't think it's a hand tapper. Colin's new favorite hobby is sort of hand tapping our punties off. I say new. It's not new at all. Colin's favorite hobby is seeing if the punties are hand tappers. Ah, I was wrong. That was actually a nice punty. Yeah, I wouldn't stamp it. So Colin's using our hot torch. You guys probably can't hear me while I have my face shield on. But this is to sort of smooth out that punty mark. And if there's a punty mark on the bottom of something, that's a really good way to tell if it's hand blown. Oop. You're welcome. So that goes away in our annealing oven. The thickest part of that is that handle. And the part we have to worry about the most is where the handle meets the cup. So we're gonna let that cool down for about 24 hours. This is sort of just to even the heat out, right? Because that was just 900 degrees. If we let it go all the way to room temperature, it's gonna crack and break into a million pieces. Another good example we have for annealing is in our ancient collection. We have that large cast bench. That annealed for about 11 months. So as the glass gets thicker, it takes longer to anneal. What else do we have? We're doing demonstrations every week. Monday, Friday, Sunday at 2 o'clock. We're getting ready to have sand casting workshops available online. We'd like to thank Owens, Illinois for sponsoring all of our demonstrations. And the galleries are open Wednesday through Sunday. So you guys can come into the glass collection and look at everything that we have. And you can watch us working sometimes through the windows since the building is all glass. Do we have any questions, Caitlin? Oh yeah, next week we have Gap. That's really exciting. So George Vitas is coming. He's a neon artist from Detroit. So Monday, Tuesday, he'll be in here working. Then the next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So 2 weeks from now, that Wednesday 2 o'clock demonstration will be George. And I know George will cook up something very experimental and fun. Cool. Thanks, guys. These are mine.